Pixels from a Crime Scene, Episode 5. The industry can't solve it alone. Due to the themes covered, this podcast is suitable only for adult audiences and not suitable for children. There is information at the end of this podcast about where you can go to get help.
I'm Angela Young, and this is Episode 5 of Pixels from a Crime Scene, a no-holds-barred look at the problem of child sexual abuse material on the internet. It takes a detailed look at the work of the Internet Watch Foundation and its partners who work to remove this material. So far in this series, we've heard from survivors of grooming, from offenders, their families, and from the IWF analysts who look for the images. Last time, we looked at the scale of the problem globally. This time, we'll be asking, what is the industry doing to clean up the internet? We'll be looking at some of the technical advances they have made, and we'll also look at the difficulties they face. I'll be talking to those responsible for child protection at Microsoft, Facebook, and Google about the challenges that lie ahead and how the industry should respond.
I think parts of the industry are doing very well. One of the problems is that parts of the industry which are doing very well tend to get the most criticism because they're the most visible, because they're finding the most material, they're reporting the most material. And there are parts of industry which consciously collude with people who distribute child sex abuse images around the world, and those that very rarely get called out and very rarely named.
Facebook has long been a leader on child safety and child sexual abuse material online, starting as one of the earliest adopters of photo DNA. We also use photo DNA, which is a photo matching technology that is used to thwart the sharing of these images. We use it across all of our platforms in different ways. So I think we are probably the only member of industry that does that. So across Instagram, across Facebook, even across the unencrypted spaces of WhatsApp, we're using technology to try to find and detect this material.
I think they do an enormous amount. Obviously, everybody's going to say they can do more. And I think really where that comes from is that not only Facebook or Yahoo or Google or whoever could do more. I think we could all do more, but the key is together. And that's that collaboration between technology companies, law enforcement, and bodies like IWF, all kind of sharing information, tools, tactics, procedures together, and coming up with innovative solutions is going to be where we take it to the next level.
That's TalkTalk's head of intrusion investigations, Colin Hardy, Facebook's head of global safety, Antigone Davis, and the chair of the IWF board, Andrew Pudifat. But not everyone thinks industry is doing enough. Hani Farid is professor of electrical engineering and computer science at Berkeley, California.
You can't simply just say we are doing everything we can. That is a vacuous statement. And we've been hearing that, by the way, for the last 10 to 15 years. You clearly are not, because if tens of millions of pieces of content are going through your services every single year, there's clearly a problem with the way you're approaching this problem.
We'll hear more from all of those speakers later. I found this episode the hardest to present, and that's because when I started this journey, I believed the myth, which this episode will seek to dispel, that the industry could solve it if they really wanted to. Now I'm not so sure. It's a complex ecosystem, and at the end of the day, as Jim Gamble, the former chief executive of CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Center, said in his TEDx Stormont talk, the internet does not abuse children.
The risk that our children face isn't from the technology itself. This is about the nature of the beast. It's the person who will use the technology of the day in any way they can to capture that upon which they're focused, so that they can turn it into a commodity and share it, or so they can revisit it at different times and places to satisfy their own deviant sexual needs.
The IWF, which commissioned this series, is funded by the internet industry. So how do they respond to criticism that they don't hold them to account? Susie Hargreaves, Chief Executive of the IWF.
We are funded by industry, but we're also, we exist for public benefit. We're a charity with an independent board, and we're independently audited every 2 years by a team that's headed by a former High Court judge. So, we have lots of checks and balances in place, but it is a good question. And what I would say is that actually to solve the problem, you need industry, government, law enforcement to work together. And we kind of sit in the middle, and we're able to provide a brokering role between all of those different partners. And you'll never solve the problem if you don't have industry on side. And I would also say that what people don't see is that we have an awful lot of conversations behind the scenes where we hold our members to account, where we talk to them, often quite tricky conversations, but we work together to try and fix the problem.
One of the first companies to try to tackle the emerging issue of online child sexual abuse material was BT back in 2003. Brian Webb, Chief Security Officer of BT's consumer business, says doing nothing was not an option and they needed some form of intervention. They came up with CleanFeed, a blocking solution to prevent inadvertent access to images of child sexual abuse.
Basically what CleanFeed does is it takes a feed of the bad addresses that contain images of child sexual abuse that's provided to us twice a day by the Internet Watch Foundation. We apply that to all of our outbound services. And most simply is if a customer, deliberately or otherwise, attempts to access one of those images, they get a page back that says, stop, don't do that, and gives them advice. And that's CleanFeed in a nutshell. And it's worked for us for more than 15 years, been very, very few issues with it. And we're comfortable that having done that, we've protected a lot of children. One of the problems that you have with CleanFeed is it doesn't work with encrypted communications. And increasingly, we're seeing web traffic going in that direction. So we've looked actively at what can we do about that? And so what we're going to do this year is going to use the IWF's hash dataset. These are, if you like, the codes of the known images of child sexual abuse that the IWF has identified. And we're going to apply that to our email platform and to our cloud hosting platform. And in that way, we're going to prevent either the transmission of known images of child sexual abuse across our email services or the storage of known images of child sexual abuse in our cloud hosting.
Over the years, there have been many other initiatives. One that has had a major effect on combating CSAM is PhotoDNA. It was developed by Microsoft in conjunction with Hani Farid, Professor in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of California in Berkeley, and a leading expert in the analysis of digital images. PhotoDNA is used to create a digital fingerprint of known images of child sexual abuse, which is then used to find duplicates and stop them being shared. Before he worked with Microsoft, by his own admission, Hani knew very little about the problem.
I really had no idea of the scope of the problem, how young the children were, and how truly awful this material was making its way around the internet. And I, with partnering with Microsoft, decided, surely there's a solution here. Surely we can't just pretend for 5 years that there's just nothing we can do, as we are in the early days of really rapid advances in technology. And so we sat down, and really in about a year, we had come up with this idea, developed it, tested it, and deployed it, and found it to be incredibly effective. And it was, I have to say, it was not really that difficult.
Microsoft made the PhotoDNA system developed by Hani freely available to other tech companies. They've also developed a new tool to tackle grooming, which they also intend to make freely available across the industry. Jacqueline Boucher is Microsoft Chief Online Safety Officer. I spoke to her on the phone from the States, so apologies for the quality of the line.
Last November, we conducted our 360 cross-industry hackathon focused specifically on detecting child online grooming for sexual purposes. And we called it a 360 hackathon because we were not just looking at the engineering and technology components of a hackathon, but we also wanted to be prepared and focused on the legal and policy work, and also the operations and policy implementation elements. So we wanted to really look at this problem from a 360-degree perspective. What the team came up with at the end of the 2 days was a working prototype for detecting child sexual exploitation and abuse potentially going on in grooming scenarios. So what the tool does is it's a series of algorithms, and it basically looks at conversation characteristics that are taking place in historical chat conversations. There might be a request for imagery. There might be a request to move to a more private platform. We want to be able to discern, if we can, if there's an age discrepancy between the two. Is it about something of a sexual nature? The tool goes on to rate these various characteristics taking place within the conversation, and then it comes out with a probability or risk score at the end that can act as a determiner for various companies to say, hey, this is perhaps a conversation that we should put human eyes on.
Grooming is one huge issue. Another is young people being tricked or coerced into creating indecent images of themselves engaging in sexual activities. This is often termed self-generated content. Microsoft have been working closely with the IWF to combat this. Here's Jacqueline again.
For the past few years, we've been working with the Internet Watch Foundation, and we've been financing and providing some seed funding for the IWF to look at this issue of what we call self-generated indecent imagery featuring youth. We've supported them for a number of years on a number of research projects. And each year, unfortunately, the findings are proving really more and more grave. Early on, it was nearly 90% of the images and videos that were assessed as part of the IWF's research that the IWF found had been harvested from their original upload locations, and they were being redistributed via third-party websites, what we call parasite websites. And a year later, that grew to nearly 100% of the assessed material. So basically what we're talking about here is young people are taking images of themselves or taking videos of themselves, and they're sharing what they perhaps perceive to be a private moment, but actually that material is being downloaded time and time again by strangers, and these young people have absolutely no idea of what's taking place, because I would posit that was certainly not what they intended.
Google has also used analytics to introduce a ban on certain search terms, and this list is constantly changing in response to how offenders are trying to keep ahead. Claire Lilly is Product Policy Advisor working on Google products. She used to work for the children's charity, the NSPCC. She also told me what else Google is doing to combat CSAM.
We have a tool called CSA Match, which basically will help you to identify video which contains child sexual abuse imagery. And we use that obviously on YouTube, but also other companies are welcome to use it across their products. And then a couple of years ago, we also released a really groundbreaking tool. It's called a Content Safety API. And what it does is helps scan products or platforms in order to identify images of child sexual abuse material at scale and at a much faster speed than ever previously has been available. But the really crucial thing about that tool is that it will identify new images of child sexual abuse, those which police may never have seen before, any other technology company may never have identified before. And for me, that is particularly impactful and groundbreaking because it means that we can identify victims who are being abused today. Not historic abuse. Sometimes in the past what we've identified as repeat uploads of historic abuse, whereas this new tool enables us to potentially find new images, therefore new victims who can be rescued. And we know that when we get feedback from law enforcement agencies around the world that a child has been rescued on the back of this, the use of this technology, that, everyone here is just so delighted and emails go around and it's really gratifying.
Not far from Google is Facebook's impressive new London headquarters. Their global head of safety is Antigone Davis.
Facebook has long been a leader on child safety and child sexual abuse material online, starting as one of the earliest adopters of photo DNA. We also use photo DNA, which is a photo matching technology that is used to thwart the sharing of these images. We use it across all of our platforms in different ways. So I think we are probably the only member of industry that does that. So across Instagram, across Facebook, even across the unencrypted spaces of WhatsApp, we're using technology to try to find and detect this material. We've been doing that for a very long time. More recently, we've actually introduced two new kinds of technology. One is a child exploitation imagery classifier that finds newly created or unknown images. So photo DNA works on images that are already known. This is finding images that are newly created. We also have launched in a classifier that we refer to as our inappropriate interactions with children classifier. Though this is a classifier to actually find and identify potentially inappropriate interactions so that we can take action, including deleting accounts when needed.
Is there more you could do?
Well, what I would like to say is there's always more that we want to do. We are fundamentally committed to these technologies. We're fundamentally committed to thwarting this problem. I think we have taken an industry-leading role in not only our own platform, but really addressing this across the internet. So very recently, we open source certain technologies that we use so that other companies could take advantage of these technologies. And we created it without any kind of a license so that people would be able to easily pick it up, and are currently working with an NGO to basically support a system that they're developing that allows lots of smaller companies to take advantage of multiple technologies.
This is a service to Media City, UK.
I'm on my way to meet Colin Hardy, Head of Online Safety at TalkTalk, an internet service provider with a much smaller share of the global market, but still one of the UK's bigger operators. Colin is encouraged by the IWF's attempts to unite the industry in tackling child sexual abuse material online, but he believes language is the problem.
One of the key areas for growth within cybersecurity has been embracing automation. There's so many different tools that you can go out and buy to help defend your network, either from phishing, from malware, from malicious employees, whatever it might be. And there's a tool for everything. And there's a platform that can help you as a business. But actually the key is making them all talk together. And so where one tool is seeing one thing that's specialist in detecting a certain type of attack, we'll feed that into the next tool, the next tool, the next tool. And that automation has really been groundbreaking over the last few years in information security. And I think that's something which really could be developed more. There's a massive conversation there to further explore within the CSAM space to say, how can we embrace automation to help organizations like the IWF who have finite resources, finite personnel, and finite technology, how can we scale it to make the problem help solve the problem in a way that's detrimental to the infrastructure for the criminals. We have a concept of a red team and blue team as an example. So my role is very much a blue team role. So we're the defenders of an organization and we're the blue light response. But also as good guys, we can stick our red team hat on and we can simulate an attack, an ethical hack of an environment. So we can hack our infrastructure before the bad guys do and hopefully fix any holes that we find along the way before the bad guys exploit them. And what that means is there are teams of highly skilled individuals throughout the UK that are red teamers. These are white hat security guys who are good guys, but they know how to hack into and find intelligence on infrastructure, organization infrastructure. And that same methodology can be turned around at criminals and used against their environment. And if you can apply a team of red teamers against a criminal infrastructure, what intelligence they could gather and what information would be really super useful for law enforcement would be amazing to see.
That's Colin Hardy, Head of Online Security at TalkTalk, which provides internet service for 4.1 million Britons. Please remember, if you do find child sexual abuse material on the web, you can report it anonymously at iwf.org.uk. These are all really positive examples of what the internet giants are doing. So there's always new tech being introduced, and we've heard about some great examples of industry initiatives to fight the problem of CSAM. But there are also new technical developments which online safety experts are afraid will really impact on their ability to find and remove online CSAM. One is something called DNS over HTTPS, or DOH as it's generally known. Now bear with me because it's getting quite technical, but I need to explain what it is so you can understand the potential impact. DNS stands for Domain Name System, and it's the phone book by which you look something up on the internet. The aim of implementing DNS over HTTPS is to increase privacy and security by preventing eavesdropping and manipulation of DNS data by so-called man-in-the-middle attacks by encrypting that data. But there are other consequences too. Fred Langford, Deputy CEO and Chief Technical Officer at the IWF, explains it would mean that things like parental controls and filters like the IWF URL block list, which is used by the internet industry to block millions of criminal images from ever reaching the public eye, would be bypassed. As a result, potentially millions of internet users across the globe of any age could be exposed to the most terrible content.
This is not a good thing for the IWF, and it's not a good thing for people who would then suffer inadvertent exposure, because what it actually means is people who aren't looking for this sort of content are more likely to stumble across it. What I've called for is equivalency. So we're always saying if you're going to implement a new piece of technology or a new standard, which is what this is, you need to make sure that you're providing the equivalent or better level of protection for children. And actually with this, I don't think that consideration was taken before the technology was developed.
BT is also concerned that DOH will mean that the steps they've taken in the past 15 years to try to block this sort of material may not continue to be effective. Alex Towers is BT's Director of Policy and Public Affairs.
Our view is there are some things that there is no defence against and where privacy is not a kind of balancing factor, and child abuse is clearly one of those things. So we need to find a way, and it's a mixture, I think, of some technical standards and some kind of policy and legal work to make it very clear that as technology changes, we don't accidentally undermine the sort of protections that we put in place to try and protect children.
Google has issued a statement saying DOH offers opportunities for improving user privacy and security. Their plan is to test DOH with a small sample of users to get feedback, although schools and businesses won't be included.
We are committed to ensuring that the deployment of DOH does not create unintended consequences, and we will continue to work with stakeholders, including ISPs, DNS providers, and internet and child safety advocates, as we make progress.
Facebook plans to encrypt its messenger service. Many of the people I've interviewed so far have expressed concerns that this will mean many of the detection tools that have been so successful in finding child sexual abuse material and getting it removed won't work. Facebook says it will provide better security and privacy for Facebook users. Let's hear first from Antigone Davis again.
And one of the things that we really see on Facebook is that more and more people are using our services to have very personal and private conversations. And they're seeking to have spaces that they can have those personal and private conversations. So we see many more one-to-one, one-to-few conversations than we used to see, smaller groups, and more people sharing more and more intimate information on our platform and across our services. And so one of the things that we want to do is fundamentally ensure the data security and privacy for those kinds of interactions. That's where the market is headed. I think one thing to keep in mind is that 85% of the market is messaging market is already in end-to-end encrypted. So currently, for example, let's take iPhone. In the United States last year, 200 million iPhones were sold. on every single one of those iPhones is iMessage, which is an app that provides end-to-end encrypted messaging. So this is where messaging is. It's what users want. And what we're really trying to do with this long lead time is get that right balance between privacy, safety, and security. So in approaching safety as we go to end encryption, we're taking basically a three-pronged approach: prevention, detection, and response. Preventing bad actors from connecting with other bad actors, preventing bad actors from connecting with victims. There's a lot that we can do in that space. Once we do that, no matter what, you're still, as you noted, going to have places where it's still going to happen, where children are still going to be victimized. How do we address, even in the best prevention systems, how do we address that? Well, a bunch of the things that we're looking at is on the response side. So can we surface reporting so that individuals are more likely to report? This is incredibly important because when young people report the content to us, we now have access to it. They can share that content, and at that point, we can do all of the normal things that we would typically do our report to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. If there's imminent harm, reach out to law enforcement if need be. We can do all of that with a report. Now, we not only want to actually surface reporting, not just in a passive way, but in an active way. So where we might see, for example, signals that a child might be in a distressing situation. Maybe they're repeatedly blocking a particular adult, or they've deleted a thread. We don't need to see the content to see that behavior, and we can surface the opportunity to report as that's happening. But also, how do we ensure that they actually take up the opportunity to report? Because sometimes people can be afraid or ashamed to report. And one of the things that we're doing right now is testing what is that right language to encourage someone to report. So, for example, with young people, they tend to not respond particularly positively to the word report. But if you ask them, do you know this person? You can start them down the path of reporting where they're more likely to report. So this is the balance that we're trying to create. How do we prevent in the first place? How do we provide really good response and reporting and support systems? And then in between that, are there ways for us to detect potential harm that's happening and break it apart and intercede?
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, says encryption will create a blind spot. Former Online Safety Minister and past senior executive at Google and Facebook, Baroness Shields, goes further.
The decision to encrypt Messenger is confounding to me. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any rational, logical, or business sense. If you think about it, the micro-targeting that's done on these platforms relies on information that people share. And if you go to an encrypted message between two people, then you can no longer sort of leverage the business model of the companies. So it makes you ask the question as to why. And to me, the only answer, and I'm sad to say this, the only answer I can think of is that the companies are reporting, I think it was Facebook reported 12 million cases last year of child sexual abuse images to NCMEC. And the problem is, once those are reported, then it's an acknowledgement that the problem is rampant on the platform. If you take away the ability to report it, then they can say, well, they can say it's increasing, decreasing, and nobody will know. We won't know anymore how many problems there'll be. Think about in the context of 12 million reports that they made last year. Those 12 million reports, there's children behind those reports that are crying for help. And without those reports, they go without help. They are out there on their own with no one to even know that they're being harmed.
There's clearly a conflict between privacy and security on the one hand and child protection on the other. I went back to Hani Farid and asked him whether he thought Facebook's plans to encrypt Messenger was responding to what customers want.
You have two options. One option is we're going to encrypt your messages so that we can't see it, government can't see it, nobody can see it. The cost of that will be that tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pieces of child sexual abuse of children roughly from the age of 2 months old to 12 years old, can be without any possible chance of getting caught, can come through the services. Which of those would you like?
That's photo DNA and image recognition expert Hani Farid on Facebook's plans to encrypt Messenger. Listening to this episode, it may seem as though the tech giants are each working on their own solutions and not pulling together. We heard from Andrew Pudafat, chairman of the IWF board, at the start of the episode. And let's finish by going back to him. He says the IWF is part of the solution.
Every company has its own engineering technology, its own business model, and its own intellectual property. So companies there's no one technical solution that you could build on, say, Google, that would work even across the whole Alphabet platform, let alone work on a Facebook platform or an Amazon Web Services platform or an Alibaba platform or a Tencent platform in China. These are all different technologies. So you can set an outcome, you can set a goal for the company, which is to remove or block the images that we're talking about, but you can't specify the technology they should use to deliver it because they're differently engineered companies. And part of that engineering is at the heart of their business model and their business success. So they can't share the way they engineer platform. Now, the exception is, I think, with a company like, or organization like us, is we provide third-party solutions. So we identify where images are held through a variety of technical means. We can make them available to a lot of companies that can't afford their own engineering solutions. So as well as providing a service to the big companies by saying, here's a checklist, make sure that these are being removed from your site by your own mechanisms. For the smaller startups, for the 5-person operation that maybe has 1 million pieces of traffic on it, we can give them a ready-made solution at a very, very cheap cost.
The issue is a complex one, and there's a lot of great work being done, but everyone has to play their part to solve it, not just the tech industry. Next time on Pixels from a Crime Scene, we'll look at some of the victories in the fight against the lasting consequences of child sexual abuse material online. Then we'll try to draw some conclusions from everything we've heard in this series. We'll ask our experts how the future looks and whether there's hope.
Every now and again you read about a teenager that's got in trouble with school for hacking into their school system. And we tell them off, and I think we should tell them off. We should then have a words and say, you're really talented and it's amazing what you can do. Can we put you on a special course for ethical hacking? Because we think you've got a wonderful career ahead of you. So we've got to find those people and then give them some support and ideas and a bit of help to make sure they want to work for the good guys.
The tolerance of hosting in any country should be zero. That's what we've done in the UK. You don't need primary legislation to do that. All of this, all of the hosting relies on companies being prepared to host. So if people aren't prepared to host and challenge it, within their own terms and conditions, they can prevent this stuff from being available.
I don't believe that anyone should say the problem's too big to handle and ignore the problem, because every single image is a real child. And for that child, they need to know that there are people like us out there fighting the problem. And I'd always say, it's how do you drink an ocean, one glass at a time. And actually, it is a war of attrition, and we need to do everything we can to fight the problem. But we can also show that where you do fight the problem, we can have real success.
If you've been affected by anything you've heard in this podcast and need to know where you can get help, please visit iwf.org.uk/podcast. The IWF is a charity and urgently needs to extend its work. To support them financially, please visit iwf.org.uk/fundraising. I'm Angela Young, and this is a Cambridge podcast production. It's produced by me and Vince Hunt. The music is by Jay Richardson, artwork by Louis Arabia, and sound design and mixing is by Ben Carver. Join me next time.